So this is a diagnostic overview on a Motorola triple nickel 280 consumer ECU. It looks to be reflash Sean Dunbar. This is your ECU right here. So this is just a report showing some of the sensor data. Ignore this because I had it hooked up to an engine that just the wiring harness, not the entire engine. Some interesting stuff that I found was if we look at the cal ID of the ECU, which is actually this here. It's a 2000 cal for 2.5 consumer, 7750 RPM. This is what was in there. When people reflash it, they don't actually change this number here, but it is different than a consumer ECM. So this cal ID is ending in 14, and a consumer ECM right here is different. That ends in 18. So it was reflashed. This kind of proves that it was reflashed. It is a consumer ECM, and the rev limit most likely was raised. The reason for that is when we look and compare kind of the fault history. Once again, ignore these active codes because I didn't have anything properly plugged into an engine, just a harness. But the fault history is correct, obviously, because it's showing recorded kind of check engine lights in the ECU itself. So I'll compare this to a stock 280 consumer here. This particular ECU had 191 hours where yours had a 242 when you sent it in. So you can see the histogram here of hours. So above 6,000 you have 0.8 hours. If we add all these up here, so you had 23.2 plus 1.8 plus 24.2 plus 31.8 plus 18.2, 5.4 plus 0.8. That's only 105 hours here. That's actually showing in this range. So the balance of that would be above 7,000. So you did about half below 7,000. You did have 370 seconds or fault seconds effectively at the rev limit. It says 1 minute here, but this only increments after you have 6 continuous seconds on the rev limiter. None of that is really that interesting, to be honest, just because any boat that you race with a small prop, you're going to be banging the rev limiter regardless. Just to give you some context, this other one, which was on a consumer engine, or a kind of a pleasure boat, had 86 seconds of rev limiter, so action. A lot less than yours, which is kind of to be expected. The interesting thing here is the fault history with regards to throttle position sensor, trigger signal, and the engine cylinder ignition misfires. So ignition 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here. This shows the amount of seconds of misfire detection effectively, or ignition circuit fault for our ECU. For yours, you had a ton here. So over 300 seconds of ignition misfire on cylinders 1. Cylinder 3 was over 120. So this is all happening in one of two ways. It's difficult to tell because obviously the ECU is pretty crude in the way it records stuff. But this is happening a combination of two things. It's misfiring because the engine's spinning higher in RPM, and it's misfiring potentially because the trigger or the crankshaft position sensor is actually, the gap might not be set correctly. So when you have too much of an air gap or too little of an air gap, I'll show you what that means in a second. So this is the service manual for 280 ROS. Looking at that flywheel with all these teeth on it, and here's the sensor that tells the ECU what position the crankshaft's in. So the air gap here should be between 25 thou plus or minus 40 thou. So basically between 64 thou, or sorry, 0.64 millimeters. So it could be almost touching, obviously, but you don't want it on the minus side because then the sensor will obviously touch. So on the large side, you'd want 65 thou here, and you want to make sure that that obviously is as close to 25, the nominal dimension, as possible. Any difference in that, and you're going to get a weird signal, and it's going to cause these misfires, which is what could have potentially been happening when you were experiencing kind of the engine hitting a brick wall at 8,500. I can't tell you what, without actually violating kind of the agreement that we have with Mercury to not reflash these ECUs. It has been reflashed, but I can't tell you what the rev limiter is until I actually look into the ECU. But this is probably why you're experiencing kind of those misfires. So a ton of misfire counts here on mainly on cylinders 1, 3, and 6, but mainly 1 and 3. And the other thing is you have a few trigger errors here, and your throttle position sensor. So TP sensor 1 and 2, this is like the fact that there's two sensors. There are two different values. So on your TP sensor 2, you had a ton of fault seconds. So that's way higher than what this particular ECU had. So this one had 2 fault seconds on that TP sensor. So you could be having a combination of things here. It could be a bad air gap on your trigger signal. It could be the fact that the ECU is only reflashed to go 8,500 RPM. It could be this throttle position sensor here causing an issue. But it could be a variety of different things. Regardless, the trigger signal here, you had 17 fault seconds here. You had a few issues with, you can see low water pressure here, 13 seconds of that, not very much. You had 3 seconds of overheating, also not very much. The 370 seconds of rev limiter is recording not only when it had the stock rev limiter, but after it got reflashed. So it won't actually count those seconds from before it got reflashed, but basically this is adapting to the new rev limiter. So you were hitting that new rev limiter for 370 seconds. So if there was no rev limiter, this would read 0. So that's kind of the proof in the pudding right there. Just dissecting all this information, it's kind of forensic after the fact, but yeah, hopefully that gives you a better picture of kind of what the ECUs had on them. So as far as reflashing them goes, they've already been sent out, so I can keep you updated on when those come back in. Also, any additional information we can get back from them. I think the rev limiter was set to, or we chose to set it to 9,600. As far as pricing goes, I need you to remind me if you wanted to have 2 ECUs and buy a consumer one from us and reflash it as well, just so you have a spare, and then do yours, obviously. So yeah, I told you the cost already for that. Let me just look it up again here. I'll pull that up. But with regards to how much the ECU would cost, is we can sell you that consumer ECU for 300 plus whatever it costs to reflash it. So just give me one moment. I'm looking up the price that I said here. It's 450 each, so 450 for the reflash, and then 300 on top of that for the con ECU. And I can send you an invoice for that if you like. It's up to you. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. But the combination of throttle position sensor, trigger, signal, and just in general hitting the rev limiter. But that ECU was reflashed from a traditional con ECU. You might ask, oh, well, is it the programming from a ROS? Well, this is the Cal ID from an ROS here. So you can see this one has a 8250 actually rev limit, but it just says 8200 here. And you can see that this one ends in -33, and this is different from what you had on yours. So yours ended in -14. Yeah, so hopefully that makes some sense. You can see here that the minimum block pressure on yours is 10.2. On an ROS, they reduced that to have pretty much no safeties for overheating, just because those motors run in and out of the water so often for the race offshore ones. So there's really no protection for that on those ones, where yours has all of this built in for RPM versus water pressure. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Be happy to answer them. Hopefully this fixes your issue. Eventually, I would kind of recommend converting to 260 stuff, maybe on the lake race motor, leave it as is, because this is definitely a better combination for lake running the boat. But for a full out drag setup, part of the reason why it's better is just the user adjustability. So you're not at the mercy of kind of this back end stuff that's not adjustable. Yeah, like I said, reach out, let me know what you want as far as payment, and remind me if you wanted both ECUs, or just one and you wanted to keep one as a spare, that type of thing. Thanks.